This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is Sarah Lancaster, K-State Weed Specialist, previewing the 2025 Chemical Weed Control Guide. She mentions what has changed and what has been included and is not included. Erin Beyer, Assistant Professor of Sustainable Meat Science and Industry at K-State, keeps the show rolling as she explains what can be found on meat labels. K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk looks at dairy prices for the last few months of 2024 to end today's show. He says what it may mean for Kansas dairy farms moving forward in 2025. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show talking about the 2025 Chemical Weed Control Guide with K-State Weed Specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
It's always a pleasure, Shelby.
Sarah, what's included in the Chemical Weed Control Guide, something that's a yearly publication?
Yeah, so the Chemical Weed Control Guide is a pretty popular publication for KSRE, and it has a variety of information related to all things herbicides. So, most folks think about this book having some recommendations for how effective different products are on key weed species, as well as kind of some of the high points of some of the label requirements for products. But it also has information, for example, if you need to look up what are the components of a premix herbicide. So if you want to know that Storin, a product which was new in the guide last year, contains mesotrione and bicyclopyrone and S-metolachlor and pyroxasulfone, you can find that in the list in the front of this book. There's also some kind of cheat sheets for calculations associated with herbicide applications, just a whole variety of things that folks can find related to herbicides in the book.
Sarah, what are some new products that are included in this year's book?
Yeah, so, a theme, folks that have heard me talk about the Chemical Weed Control Guide before have heard me say this. There's a theme the last few years is that we have some new brand names, but we really don't have any novel active ingredients. So I'll kind of just start at the top in terms of how I've been talking about them in presentations this fall. The first one to bring to folks' attention is a product called Iron Gates. It is a herbicide that is labeled for use in wheat. So the active ingredients there are flucarbazone and pyroxalam. So those are, again, active ingredients that are already in the marketplace. I've looked at it for control of Danny Brome, and it did a nice job for us. Some of the key weeds that this product will control are weedy bromes, mustards, and Italian ryegrass. So that's one product. Another product is called Inversa, and Inversa is really just Corteva's encapsulated acetochlor product. So acetochlor is a group 15 herbicide that we like to use pre-emergence, post-emergence. You might know it as Warrant or Harness. So Inversa is kind of like Corteva's Warrant. It's an encapsulated acetochlor product. Another new Corteva product would be Resicor Rev. So folks who have used Resicor in the past, the key difference between Resicor Rev and kind of the original Resicor is that Resicor Rev contains that encapsulated acetochlor formulation that we talked about for Inversa. Another thing to be aware of with Resicor Rev, last year the same product was on the market as Resicor XL. They tweaked the formulation, some of the adjuvants, just a little bit, and had to relabel it as Resicor Rev for this crop year. Probably the most novel new product that we have is a product called Certain. It's a BASF product, and it's a premix of pyroxasulfone, so Zidua and Anthem, along with saflufenicil or Sharpen. The thing that is different about Certain is that the saflufenicil is encapsulated. And so we typically think about Sharpen as having quite a bit of burn down activity, and with the encapsulation, it doesn't. So it's sort of, someone asked me kind of what is it like? The closest thing I've come up with for a comparison for Certain is that it's sort of like a Fierce, but for corn. So we use a lot of Fierce, which is a Group 14 product, flumioxazin or Valor plus pyroxasulfone, and this is Sharpen plus pyroxasulfone. So a Group 14 and a Group 15 combined. In our trials, it's performed very well, comparable to products like Resicor, Acheron, and Storin. The last two products that we have are based around glufosinate or Liberty. So the first one is called Zalo. It is an AMVAC product that is a premix of glufosinate and quizalofop. So quizalofop is the active ingredient in Assure. So this is a soybean product, good for grass control, and then you've got that glufosinate in there to help with some of our broadleaves. So we haven't looked at a ton of treatments with this product, but the ones we have, it's performed like a mix of glufosinate and quizalofop. So it's another option for folks who are growing glufosinate tolerant soybeans. The last product on the list is Liberty Ultra. So Liberty Ultra is a refined or purified version of Liberty 280 SL. So similar to how we have some formulations of metolachlor products that are metolachlor and some are S-metolachlor, so like dual versus dual 2. In this case, we have glufosinate and L-glufosinate. So L-glufosinate is the version of the molecule that actually kills the weeds, and there's a higher concentration of L-glufosinate, or the active version of the molecule, in Liberty Ultra. So use patterns are going to be really similar to Liberty 280. The rates are bumped down just a little bit to account for, again, that higher concentration of the effective molecule. One of the reasons that I've paid a lot of attention to that Liberty Ultra label is because it's the first herbicide label we've seen that is compliant with Endangered Species Act requirements. And we have talked about that aspect of that label in a previous episode. So those are the new products in the 2025 Weed Guide.
Something else in the guide that you wanted to take the time to mention, Sarah, a language change for atrazine.
Yeah, so we've been talking about this a little bit over the last couple of years as atrazine is working its way through the re-registration process. We're seeing some changes in the language and some of the labeled uses for that product. One of the big changes that affects Kansas farmers is that atrazine cannot be applied to like corn stalks or milo stubs, things like that. So if you want to use it in a non-crop situation, we're limited to that wheat stubble type of situation. So there's some pretty specific restrictions for using atrazine in non-crop situations in Kansas.
Another important thing not found in the guide, over-the-top dicamba products.
Right. So normally we talk about things we're adding to the guide, but this is a case where right now the products like Extendamax and Genia and Tavium do not currently have labels for the 2025 season. So, myself and my counterparts across the country, we are not including those products in our weed guides this year because they're not labeled. So, that's a whole nother show we could talk about, Shelby, is, what to think about for growing soybeans or cotton without dicamba over the top if you're in the Extend systems. So just something that folks need to be aware of for this summer.
Sarah, where can people find the 2025 Chemical Weed Control Guide?
Sure. So one place that's easy access and quick access is online through the KSRE bookstore, and I'm sure you're going to drop that link in your show materials. And then county agents will have copies. We'll have copies at extension events this winter, so should be pretty easy to put your hands on a hard copy as well.
Sarah, if people end up seeing the guide and have questions, can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. I'm always happy to hear feedback on the guide or questions for clarification on anything folks need to know.
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster discussing the 2025 Chemical Weed Control Guide. You can find it by going to bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu or by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. Before we cut to a short break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey as they discuss how several places within the Los Angeles metro area, rural as well as urban, are being impacted by the destruction of this week's series of wildfires.
Multiple wildfires raging out of control tonight.
Sounds from the devastating Southern California wildfires. As of Friday morning,
the Palisades and Eaton fires collectively have torched over 30,000 acres of land, and unfortunately a lot of that has been heavily populated areas.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says while most of the news coverage focuses on destruction within suburban parts of the Los Angeles metro area,
as you move up into the hills, it's more sparsely populated, but there are some agricultural lands there, some ranch lands. And we saw that back in December with the Franklin fire that burned through some agricultural communities. And that has happened again. The damage is extensive to farm buildings, fencing, and to animals, unfortunately. And so we are dealing with some of the agricultural consequences in the far northern suburbs of Los Angeles with these large fires.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was USDA's Rod Bain and USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because when we come back, we'll be joined by Erin Beyer as she discusses meat labels. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Tuesday show talking about meat labels with Assistant Professor of Sustainable Meat Science and Industry at Kansas State University, Erin Beyer. Erin, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Erin specifically focused towards meat labels today, and what can people find on a label?
So there is more information on labels today than I think there ever has been. So kind of the basic label, let's talk about a commodity label. It will tell you the species, the primal that cut came from, and then whether or not it is a steak or a roast. So the traditional label that comes on all commodity meat products is really just designed to help consumers purchase their products and for the intended use. So if you see a roast, we're hoping that most consumers know that roast should not be grilled and should have a low, slow type cooking method or should be used in a typical roast with a wet cooking method. And so that is the primary usage for that labeling system. And then from there, it takes off to a lot of other different types of labels. We have now branded programs, which really encompass over 75% of the market. We also have a lot of meat processing labels and animal product labels, which are then designed to not only help consumers know how to cook their products, but also just to giving them a little bit more information about how that meat was raised and or processed to be in the case.
When you say branded programs, what do you mean by that?
So branded programs have really taken off over the past couple of decades. This is where we get a lot of differentiation of quality. And again, like I mentioned, 75% of the market are considered branded today. So we kind of have two different sectors, branded or commodity. Commodity would have no branding associated with it. So it would just say, it would have a scale label, which has just like a barcode with what I mentioned, the species, the primal, the cut. A brand would then be like your certified Angus beef, a very specific, either most likely a premium program brand. So something in which the consumers most likely are going to have trust with that product and are going to normally associate them with being higher quality than commodity. Is that always true? Maybe not so much. However, they have separated themselves as saying, this is our label, this is our brand. And, you most likely look them up online to see like what different specifications that program has. Like CAB has its 10 different parameters that have to be met in order for that product to be labeled as CAB, and that's probably the most famous that consumers can go into the store and have a lot of high respect and trust to see that brand.
Today, also wanting to mention some different things that people could find on that packaging, and wanting to mention natural, naturally raised, USDA organic, and starting with natural. What does that mean?
So natural is probably the most confusing. And if you look it up, it's also the one that has the least amount of guidance on USDA's website. So labels in general, if you are adding an additional labeling claim onto a meat product, it has to be approved by the USDA. Everything, including a name. So every label that gets put on a product for USDA has to go through an approval process. It takes about 6 weeks. So once it finally does get approved, then it can be printed on the label. Natural, so whenever they are approving these labeling claims, they are going to be following their list of criteria. So natural has probably the least specific in terms of what can constitute as natural. So in general, it is minimally processed, which is kind of the vague one, and it has no artificial preservatives and cannot have, no all natural ingredients is essentially the three parameters there. And so for our perspective, that's basically everything in the meat world, right? You have a steak that has had nothing done to it besides it was sliced off of its primal. It's already natural. So almost all fresh meat, unless it has been injected, even some injected products can be natural if it does not have certain ingredients. So if it just has salt, water, and a couple other specific natural ingredients, then it can also use that claim. So the vast majority of meat is natural. However, not all go through the process of getting that added. For one, I think there's an acceptance in our world that we shouldn't be adding natural to all meat products because they're naturally natural, right? So really, we only see that claim then on a processed product that has only been really injected with these natural ingredients.
Erin, how does natural differ from naturally raised then?
Naturally raised then is about the animal process. So how was it raised as a animal, and natural is about how it was processed post-harvest. So naturally raised then just means it has never been given antibiotics, growth promotants, or hormones.
And what about USDA organic?
USDA organic's also a big one I get questions about. We have a couple different labeling options for organic in general. We have 100% organic, which means for all different commodities that everything in or around that product is organic. So we don't really use that one for meat. We usually just use the seal, which means that 95% of that product is organic, which makes sense from a meat product standpoint. And then we have other ones which are mostly used for like center store, which would be used with organic ingredients. So that seal, whenever you see that on a product, on a meat product specifically, that just means that it was raised with organic methods, if you also a little bit vague, since the last third trimester, essentially, of gestation for our red meat species, or the first day of life for poultry. And also very similar to naturally raised in terms of no hormones, no growth promotants, no antibiotics, and fed with organic ingredients. However, we do like to preface to our consumers that does not mean that there's a difference in the nutritional content of that product, nor are there any changes in food safety.
And then there's a couple other labels, raised without antibiotics, raised without added hormones, and are they what they sound like?
They should be, right? However, we always want to preface, too, that some species, you're not allowed to add hormones to them. So you should only really see that label on a red meat, on beef, on lamb, in which you can add hormones specifically. Otherwise, it should not really be added. We do see them every once in a while. However, this is really USDA's role to make sure that they're not adding that label to swine, to poultry, because that's not giving consumers the right information, right? Because you're not going to find it in any of those products. However, every once in a while, you'll still see a picture of one pop up that maybe got slid through. And also with hormones, it's a little bit... There's hormones in all products, right? All animal products. So that label has been confusing over the years because we produce hormones as living beings. The animals produce hormones. So nothing is ever hormone-free, but it can be labeled as without added hormones if they were not given growth promotants or a hormone implant.
So, Erin, as you're talking through all these different labels, what do you think are really important things if farmers, producers, ranchers are wanting to communicate this with potential customers, consumers?
In general, these labels do add extra information to the consumers. So I do think that they're a positive for consumers. And really on the big story here, I think, is on our side, we need to maybe do a better job of communicating what these mean to consumers. I think that what they mean by dictionary, by USDA, is very, set in stone, which is a good thing. There's not a ton of vagueness besides, like I mentioned, with the natural. So I think from a producer standpoint, these labels are positive if they're able to add them. However, my opinion really is to not go out of your way to add them unless it really makes sense for your production. So not to go out of your way to become a organic operation unless it's already makes sense for your setup. Essentially, you will get some premiums for some of these programs at the beef during harvest at the packing plant. However, again, I don't know that it always makes sense unless it's something that you're already doing.
So when we come to seeing packages in the store, you've mentioned a few times everything has been approved by the USDA to be put on that package?
Yes. Yeah, in the process, so when I worked at retail, we would have, if we did a USDA product that had a special label or brand, we would have to bake in at least an extra 6 months in our whole timeline to kind of work with USDA. They are, which is a good thing, right? That's not a bad thing, not a diss on USDA at all. I think it's great that they are so picky on labels because I do think that we need to have that high integrity of what the consumers are seeing and that it's matching up from product to product. But yeah, it's a pretty intense process to get that approved.
Erin, for a little bit of fun, what has been one of your most interesting labels you've seen?
So not in a while. I feel like we have cleaned up a lot of labels. However, probably like in 2015, I saw gluten-free water. So that's been my biggest laugh in terms of labels. I've seen some other crazy ones, but that one definitely takes the cake in terms of, I don't know how that one got approved.
Erin, if anyone is wanting to find out more information on labels, what's your recommendation?
So a couple different resources. K-State has a really good one-pager document talking about labels. If you look it up on K-State Extension Meat Science, you can see a document about meat labeling. Otherwise, if I am pulling information, I always just go to USDA's website. So I would search USDA Organic USDA label, and there's a great document about that. So for each one of the labels that can be approved by the USDA, they have a really good page about each one explaining what that means, what it doesn't mean.
Erin, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much.
That was Assistant Professor of Sustainable Meat Science and Industry at K-State, Erin Beyer. I will link the resources that she mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. With 2024 now in the books, it's time to take a look ahead to 2025. Just what can dairy farmers expect to see? K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk looks at the last few months of 2024 and how that is an encouraging sign for dairy farmers for 2025.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers as we look forward to 2025. The last few months in 2024 have actually been a pretty decent spot for us in the dairy industry when it comes to the margin between milk and feed. We've seen steady increases in the margin between milk and feed prices over the last few months, and in fact, in October and September, we reached levels that we actually have not seen since 2005. As you think about that, that's nearly 20 years ago that we saw these sorts of levels. Now, it's a combination of changes in milk price as well as changes in feed prices. So as we look forward to 2025, where do we think this margin will head? Well, I think most of our economists have indicated that we should see fairly decent milk prices through at least the first half of 2025, and we don't expect great changes in feed prices during that time. So if these two things hold steady, then that means that margin should stay up around I3, which is really excellent in our industry. That should help with our cash flow issues, keeping in mind that for the previous 3 years, we saw levels that did not reach 2. So it should help us a lot when it comes to paying bills and getting ahead on a few things. Now, what do we think is going to happen with milk supply, and how would that possibly impact milk price going into 2025? Well, basically, our cow inventory is fairly steady, so we don't see a great change in the number of cows that will be milked across the United States through the first half of 2025. We may see increases in production per cow as a result of a little wider margin in feed and maybe feeding our animals just a little bit different for a higher level of production with lower feed costs. So that may change total milk supply slightly, but probably not greatly. Some other things that may impact this would be the changes in the milk marketing order. We don't know exactly what the outcome of the vote is going to be, but we should know that early in 2025. If this does pass, there will be some changes in raw milk prices due to that. And that should, again, probably add, in most cases, to the price that our farms are receiving, so it should actually increase the milk-to-feed ratio in a favorable way for our dairy farms. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, seeing some bright spots in our future in 2025 when it comes to milk and feed prices.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, this reminder, the 22nd Annual Cover Your Acres Winter Conference is being held next week, January 21st and 22nd, at the Gateway Civic Center in Oberlin. The conference is a joint venture between K-State Research and Extension and conference sponsors. The program brings together 10 unique research-backed sessions designed around what producers say they want and need. Some of the topics for the 22nd Annual Cover Your Acres Winter Conference include the evolving wheat virus complex and innovative strategies for targeting wheat end uses, guidance on making smart fertilizer investments during challenging economic times, machinery economics, and a session on improving dryland cropland. The cost is $80 per day, including walk-ins, and includes lunch, morning and afternoon refreshments, as well as comprehensive educational materials. There's also a good chance for networking. The full conference schedule and online registration are available online at www.coveryouracres.com. That's www.coveryouracres.com. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.